I'm Eric Wolf, and my experience in business peer groups has changed my life, especially my membership in Vistage, one of the world's largest CEO advisory groups. I'm an entrepreneur, a business owner, and a Vistage speaker on the power of marketing. This podcast is dedicated to the people who make those experiences possible, the peer group chairs. Every episode, I interview a Vistage chair who has dedicated their time to helping entrepreneurs like me succeed. Today, my guest is Mr. David Quick. David comes to us from Indiana, from Bloomington, Indiana, where he runs a small business Vistage group. We're also going to definitely touch on David's other interests, where he is he's a Pinnacle implementer, and you also work with Cultural Index. So I'm very interested in both of those topics as well, and so we'll definitely hit on them. You've got an excellent beard. Thank you for joining me,
Eric. Same impressive full beard there. I just have the extended goatee, and really glad to spend time with you today. Appreciate you having me.
So where and I almost always end up starting here with folks. How did you get involved with Vistage? What was the road that led you to what you're currently doing?
So I three-time CEO, left doing that. It's one of those, had aspirations when I was young, left the Navy, and I wanted to be a CEO by the time I was 40. I'm in my third CEO stint, leave when I'm 42, and literally was like, now what? And I remember somewhere along the route, like, why did I want to do this so bad? Kind of was the overwhelming thought. And I'm not sure, people have asked me, and I can't remember if I found Vistage or they found me, where I responded to an ad or they found me and reached out. But my first meeting was with a Master Chair in Cincinnati, and Jean Lauterbach is her name. And she said, hey, let's meet, let's talk about it. She was a Master Chair, and we met at a German restaurant in Batesville, Indiana, and had just a great lunch. And from almost the get, I was like, man, I really admire Jean. I like what she's saying. And, the rest was go through Chair Academy and all the rest of it. And it's been awesome. So, probably owe a lot of that to Jean Lauterbach, at the time, Master Chair in Cincinnati, and just was a great influence on me, just in a short lunch in a German restaurant in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. So,
and a pretty sweet shout out. I like that.
Yeah.
So what? Tell me about the three companies that you ran before you were a Vistage chair.
Yeah, so I ran a home delivery medical supply company. So think diabetes, care, ostomy, those things. Left there and ran a hydro massage bed company where you use high pressure water to give a deep tissue massage. And was there for a couple of years, and then a specialty bed company called Vivax Medical in Connecticut. So those three companies, and one of them we sold twice. The other two kind of were early stage growth, both private equity, and was all right. What's next? And I don't know what it was, but that led to Vistage. So
very cool. Had you ever had like a peer group experience while you were running any of these companies? Did you ever have any version of that experience that you've been delivering to your members?
One day, one of my early CEOs was a tech member in Florida, and he couldn't go one day, and he said, hey, do you want to go? I'm like, yeah. And so I participated for one day, probably now almost 20 years ago, maybe even more, in Florida. And the experience was awesome, kind of stuck with me. Didn't pursue that when I was a CEO. Probably would have helped me certainly, but the process after has been awesome, both for me and for members. So.
And it's come up on this podcast before, but for the uninitiated, uninformed, tech was Vistage before it was Vistage, and I think they still call it that in Canada, if I'm remembering correctly.
You are correct.
That hydro massage bed thing, that's not something that you'd sell to the general public, I'm imagining. Is that something that I just like have in my basement?
You could. They right as I was leaving, they were designing a home version of the bed. Most of it was found in health clubs, but early on was kind of everywhere. PGA had a couple of them in trailers. It's great for lower back pain. There's some professional baseball players that had them in their home for lower back pain, but most of it was kind of gym, spa, and gyms was the big mover, was the early. So like almost every Planet Fitness now has multiple hydro massage in their facilities.
Sounds
Both,
delightful.
it's awesome. Early on in the kind of exploratory learn the business, I did a bunch of customer events, and my favorite of all time was a Gold's Gym, where they had brought it into the Gold's Gym, they had purchased and they used it. We were just doing some customer testimonials, and the lady was funny. She kind of like whispered to me. She goes, "Don't tell the owner, but the only reason I come to the gym is for this bed." She goes, "I don't come work out. I don't do anything else. I just come and get a massage every day." I'm like, okay.
Nice.
So yeah.
Very nice. So tell me about, so when did you start your group?
I think 11 plus years ago, probably. I think we'll
So
have the 12th year in, I think July. So 11 and a half years, something like that.
that's a pretty long tenure from what I've seen for the small business groups.
Yeah, it's been
Because
a
my
fun journey.
because my understanding is that 11 years ago there really weren't a lot of them.
There probably wasn't. I just looked at the format, small town, Bloomington, college town. I think 40,000 residents without the university, and was like,
Right.
yeah, I think this is just a better fit for the business size, and kind of do hybrid. I'm probably in between the typical CE group and an SB group, but
Sure.
both from how I run the meeting and who participates. So, we have some larger companies. I think we got a handful that are over 50 million in revenue. So that's not a
Oh
typical.
yeah, that's not conventional for a
Yeah.
small SB group. So very cool.
Yeah.
Um, what's the when you have a group that you've been carrying for that long and it's got this, now all this history behind it. What is what is your biggest challenge as a chair? What's different between now and when you first started the group?
For me personally, there's always the hey, let the group go where they need to go. And I wish I could attribute this quote to a wise chair, and I can't remember where, either at Chair Academy or one of the best practice sessions, but said that the metaphor he uses all the time is every member has two hands on the wheel, and I have one finger, and I
Right.
guide them right or left. And I wish I could remember who, but that has stuck with me from day one. And there are many days that I feel like I'm wrestling the wheel from them and saying, I'm in charge. We're going where I want to go. And so that's a constant. And I think for many, high autonomy leaders, that's the challenge of chairing is, yeah, it's their journey,
Right.
not mine. And sometimes the answer seems so evident. And as Vistage teaches us, slow that process down. So that's the biggest challenge. And over time, I've given more and more power to the group and seen remarkable returns from that. Probably most importantly, just in size of the group, who comes, how they drive referrals. And, as you've alluded to, I have other businesses. So I've put that to them early on. And in the last 5 years plus, they've responded and continue to keep the group full with very little effort from me, which is awesome.
That is
So.
awesome. That's really terrific. How oh, and you mentioned that the whole thing about having one finger on the wheel and even when it's like, man, this is so obvious. Like, geez, don't just see that you should be turning right here. And I imagine, or I'm getting a picture that if 11, 12 years later, that's still something that you think about. I imagine it would have been something that would have been really hard in the beginning. Was that a tough adjustment?
For sure. As you move from running companies to leading this peer group, there was always the, hey, I'm in charge. I have to add value. I have to do the heavy work. I mean, I go back to early days where it was, here's my PowerPoint presentation for the whole meeting. Here's the agenda. Here's every section. And, now it's, here's some pre-work. Here's what we're thinking about, a warm-up exercise, check in, and let's do the heavy lifting of issue opportunity processing. But still, I mean, this is probably less than a year ago. We had an issue processing where a member brought something, and essentially it was, hey, I have these two things I need to spend money for. I'm hesitant to do so. And in atypical fashion for me, I kind of took charge and, drove people to the answer. And I had a member subtly in our one-to-one the next day say, that was not typical for you, Dave. What the hell, kind of thing.
Mm.
And I ended up sending an apology to the group and, like, hey, that's not how this is supposed to work. And either my frustration, my temperament, my something that day led me to go back to my old ways of just saying, this is what we will do. And, most were like, didn't notice it, no big deal. Others were, yeah, you kind of were like bossy, sassy, take charge. And I'm like, yeah, that's not how I want to be viewed in that setting. So, despite that, 10 years in, I still, and this is all of us. There are days where who we are at our core shows up, and in that setting, who I am at my core is awesome for some things and not so great for others. So
Right.
that self-awareness is always good to think about and be intentional.
Oh, very cool. You've got a really cool, I mean, and especially being small business group, small town, as you said, you've got a lot of generational diversity in your group, which is pretty remarkable. Can you talk to that for a minute and walk through how that goes and how that dynamic has fed your success in the group?
Yeah. So early on, we added a 22, 23-year-old second generation owner
Wow.
/ CEO to the group. And at the time, I think we had a 72-year-old. We now still have a 72-year-old, but the 72-year-old, I think, was in the group for about 8 years,
Wow.
left the group after he was selling his company and going through a transition. But it's been awesome to have that span. And as I'm sure most people that have been in a Vistage group, the diversity of all sorts is what makes the experience awesome. And, we have clearly that diversity. We have most others that people would think of. And, if we just look at my favorite story of all this is we have a holster company leader in our company that makes concealed carry holsters. And I have a self-admitted hippie that runs a scuba snorkel company and, island hop still and goes down to the islands and sells his wares. And the holster guy came into to our meeting as a guest, and he sits down and in introduction says, I make concealed carry holsters. And the liberal left, hippie that's told us stories about, everything, the good old hippie days and drugs and, all that lifestyle, looks at him and says, concealed carry? Are you carrying today? And the member or the member guest turns to him and says, of course I am. And, eyeballs get huge and there's a reaction. And by the end of the meeting, the liberal self-proclaimed hippie is apologizing, going, hey, I am really sorry. This is how I was raised. And what was funny is that I intentionally, throughout kind of the setup for the meeting, was like, I need to sit these two next to each other just to get that out of the way. And, it turned out to be awesome. They're, great friends now, probably 5 years post. And they both talk about that experience. And I think that's the beauty of Vistage, is that you get that diversity, that perspective, that in everything. And, whether that's how would I handle the situation to here's a story about my upbringing, you get that in every meeting. And it's if we did more of this in society today, we'd be better off, is what I'm convinced of. If we can have the conversation, if we can explain our viewpoint, if we can share in a longer format, good things happen. And, that's most Vistage meetings. You get the opportunity to share that much different perspective and you get to appreciate it. There's many of in our group would go, well, what would Bill say? And that's Bill's not in our group, but that thought of, we can think about how different personalities and perspectives would handle something. So.
No, it's absolutely 100% true. And yeah, we've got in my group, definitely, well, I would say that we have a very wide spectrum of folks on a lot of different kind of parameters, and we do all manage to get along because, like, hey, I can, I don't need to agree with your point of view, and certainly politics becomes very, very heated nowadays. But it's like, hey, I can, you talk to me in a way that's respectful of my views. You talk to me in a way that suggests that hey, these are my reasons for feeling this way. And you find that there is places where you can meet, and
there's a great
it's nice.
There's a great Abraham Lincoln quote that says, "I don't like that man much. I must need to get to know him, but must need to get to know him better." And
Yes.
it's that premise that we can be curious, we can learn more, we can challenge the perspective, we can ask questions, be curious, and with that comes some sort of knowledge. Whether we agree, we learn
Well,
something. I think
and
that's what's up
and potentially some sort of discomfort.
for sure.
It's
Yeah.
and it's interesting because you're right, in a Vistage setting, you get to have more of those conversations in a civil, respectful way that is become less than normal in our society the way it is today.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that's the beauty of chairing, is that we can intentionally choose to have that in our group or intentionally choose not to have it in your group. And I've chosen, I'm sure you're the same, that helps us, that helps the group. So,
I'd love to ask you about the two other businesses that you're involved with because not only is that an interesting thing about you, but that also, but you have certainly chosen two complementary things that play very nicely in that Vistage ecosystem. I mean, you're from from the perspective of Pinnacle, I'll let you explain it, but essentially it's a scalable business process that you can adapt for your company.
yeah. So, Pinnacle Business Guides, formed by some EOS implementers that left EOS during that transition from privately
When
held to
to
PE.
franchisees.
Yeah, so Dragonfly buys them, says, "Hey, implementers will become franchisees." Greg Cleary, founder, and a couple others went off and framed or started Pinnacle. And I found out it from a past Vistage Chair who from Chair Academy, have stayed very connected and coached each other, and literally have become mentors for each other through the whole process. Steve Prada, John Prada. And the experience was, hey, you should go check this out, and did. And what I loved about Pinnacle versus other business operating systems like Scaling Up or Traction or
Yep.
Discipline Execution are that very, as I frame it, and not many say it this, but I do, agnostic. It's a very open view of business operating systems. So, if you love the concepts in Traction, we can use the concepts in Traction in a publicly available way. Can't use the
Sure.
Traction forms, but if you want to call it VTO and you pull the form from the website, I'll use VTO. We have what we call a 2-page strategic plan or strategic vision execution plan, very similar to Scaling Up. So there's a lot of similarities between all of it, but freedom to help businesses scale by setting long-term vision, 3 to 5 year goals, an annual goal process, quarterly rocks, and then a weekly tactical scoreboard. Real focus on 4 principles, which are people, performance, playbooks, and also purpose. People, purpose, playbooks, and performance. And a system to move companies from early, we don't have any of that defined, to very advanced. How do we drive the culture? How do we make those things happen and be accountable to a journey? And we use a mountain climbing metaphor. We rope in with leadership teams. We help
Right.
guide them up the mountain, and pause at regular intervals to give them a outside perspective, system of accountability, and the challenge to press forward.
When and when I first started with Vistage, and I ultimately ended up using EOS in my business, but it was striking to me that I wasn't alone in not having these things in place, and it's a real common malady among not only Vistage members but entrepreneurs in general, and people will say like, well, what's the best system? And I'm not beholden to any of them, but my feedback is usually something along the lines of, well, you know what, it doesn't necessarily matter, if one is better or one is, it's like fill the gap between where you are and what you need.
Yeah, Eric, and I say it differently. I'm like, well, any of these systems will work if you do the work.
Right.
It's the same as our diets. Like if you want to lose weight, don't eat the cookie. And if you
Right.
do the work, you lose the weight. And so very similar here. And then the other side is, well, who's best aligned to help you and your team do the work? And so I think it's more about the guide or the implementer if you want outside help, much like, hey, it's about the Vistage chair for my
Yes.
Vistage.
And we've talked in here a lot about how what a big attachment that Vistage chair, how important that is in the person's journey. The chair is so vitally important.
Yeah. And so all of that is, where are you at in that selection process? So, I'm with you. EOS scaling up 4 disciplines. There are plenty of business operating systems, and if you want an outside implementer, you should interview a handful of them and look at their systems and what the merits are. And ultimately, you're choosing a guide or a coach. And this is, I always use the metaphor in choosing a coach, and you always use a golf metaphor. Well, if you want to be a better golfer and you want a coach, great. If you don't want to be a better golfer or you don't want to have a coach, then this is a senseless conversation.
Right.
So you have to be coachable and want to have a coach, and you have to want to get better. If you don't embark. It's the same as Vistage. If you don't want to get better, if you don't want to challenge yourself, if you don't want to be coachable, don't join.
That
So,
all of those things are absolutely 100% true.
yeah.
And then for culture index, that also fits really nicely into a problem that a lot of Vistage members have, which is, how do I know if I'm hiring the right people?
Yeah. And it's been, I would say, transformational for the group. Many have used my services and continue to. And even those that don't, it's become the language of personality and hiring and coaching and inspiring. And so almost every one of our meeting, people are like, well, what's their profile and how do we know
Yep.
what they are? And so, aside from all the benefits of assessments, and I think assessments are much like we talked about business operating systems, you should assess. And I tell
Yeah.
people you should assess to the manner of time and money that you have. It gives us more information. We should use that information to both hire and coach and inspire in ways that most of us don't understand. And I'm 20 years using Culture Index. I think, the third ever client using that system, and I still most days go, don't do enough to understand who I'm dealing with on the other side, including people like my wife, who I know her profile and I know the way I should treat her. And there's always, as in we look at everything, like a reminder to like, oh yeah, this would make that interaction more positive if I choose to be and be intentional. And we talk about it as it helps people live the platinum rule. It's treat others how they want to be treated instead of treat others how I want to be treated. Most of us understand that and go, well, that works for, and we talk about it in Culture Index, for about 5% of the population. If you treat everyone the way you want to be treated, you're hitting home runs for 5% of the population. Everyone else, you're striking out. And so if you want to be a student of personality and how to lead and inspire, understand who you're talking to and how to deal with them, and then influence them in a way they want to be influenced.
And I think that there's like an interesting thing to be said. And I'm a marketer by trade, and something that I've been telling my clients for a long time. Well, hey, why do I need to strategize around this stuff? Why do I need to have a marketing plan? It's like, okay, well, what would you rather have, a lottery ticket or an insurance policy? And it's essentially a really similar thing in hiring, where so often the things that where hires go wrong in many ways are predictable based on not only how they are but also how you are, and wouldn't be magical if we could know those things, and where that offer letter isn't attached to a lottery ticket, but it's an insurance policy.
Yeah, Eric, dead on. We talk about all the time that this is simply batting averages based on statistics. And we can tell predictively how well someone's going to bat in this
Right.
role. And that doesn't mean it will hold true. It just says predictably, statistically, this person has
Yes.
a higher likelihood of success. And what I have found in my career is it does better than I do. And I should listen to the assessment tools and I should ask the questions that it begs me to ask. And we often don't. And that's all there. It's in front of us. It's strong statistical predictive data. Like everything else, it's statistical and it's predictive. It's not perfect. It won't make decisions for us, but man, is it better than what we can do by our gut.
David, if you were talking to somebody right now that was a entrepreneur, business owner that was sitting across the table from you right now saying, I've never been in a peer group. I don't know what a peer group is going to do for me. What advice would you give that person?
Well, it's funny. I had that conversation this morning with a new member that runs a restoration company, and he's exploring it. Someone gave him a referral. And what I told him is that, hey, more than anything, it gives you two things. It gives you an opportunity to step out of the day to day. Most of us put our swim trunks on and get in the deep end of the pool and tread water. This forces us to get out of the pool and go, where do I want to swim? That happens at least one day a month. If you have a good Vistage chair, you get 2 days a month. And when you're
Right.
1-to-1 and then you're meeting, and you get to step out and go, well, what am I doing? Where am I going? And you get, depending on the size of your group, 14, 16, 18, 20 different perspectives on that very thing, where you should swim. And what I told him is inherent in all the Vistage groups I've seen, and it's part of the carefrontation and how they think about it, is not only do you get those perspectives, you get people that truly care. And the environment breeds that. You get people that will challenge you, that will do that in different ways. And I go, much like the perspectives, you're going to have people challenge you along that spectrum. You're going to have people that'll be in your face going, you said you were going to do this. Why didn't you? And you'll have others that lovingly will say, man, it seems like you're really struggling with this. What's going on? And I go, what the beauty is, you get all that. You get that inherently part of the process. Some of it's very structured and intentional, and some of it's just, if, as you said, if you've been meeting with these people for 7+ years, you learn to care about them and you want them to succeed. You want them. And so, we've had, and I'm sure the Vistage stories go all the time. We've had people, and, I love to challenge the group, to challenge the members. And one of my favorites was, hey, how are we all feeling about John today? And one of the guys said, if I were John, I would have a cot in my office and I would not leave the building until this were solved. And John seems like he does not give a shit. And, you get that bold perspective, and then you get somebody that's going to be kinder, nicer, going, hey, I really think you need to do this, John. And that's the beauty. So if entrepreneurs want that, and all the values of Vistage come through, you're not alone. You're not isolated. You have better thinking. All the things that Vistage promises come through, and they come through in almost every meeting.
And imagine having to say that to John when he's concealed carrying. That's you got to have a special level of comfort with a person, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, it's been really great hanging out with you. I really appreciate you being my guest today. Thank you so much, David.
Eric, really appreciate the time as well. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Chairwaves. You can subscribe to our feed using Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your platform of choice. You can also visit chairwaves.com for more information. Chairwaves is hosted and produced by me, Eric Wolf, and to connect with me, you can visit my website at ewolf.live. That's EWOLF.live. And a disclaimer, while I love Vistage and CEO peer groups, this podcast is not owned by or affiliated with Vistage or any other peer organization. Thanks for listening.